Morning of my sister's wedding, I wore a dress the color of dusty rose and told myself everything would be fine. I had been telling myself that for 8 months. Since the engagement party at the Hollenbeck house in Greenwich, where my mother stood by the shrimp cocktail for 40 minutes because no one came to talk to her. Since Christmas dinner, when my future brother-in-law's mother, I'll call her what my sister always called her, just his mother, because she never once asked me to call her anything warmer, arranged the place cards and put my parents at the far end of the table, next to the kitchen door. Since the bridal shower, when she introduced my mother to her friends as Fiona's family, not by name, not with anything attached, just Fiona's family, the way you might say the help. Fiona is my sister. She's 29, 3 years older than me. She's the kind of person who apologizes when someone else bumps into her, who brings homemade banana bread to new neighbors, who once spent 40 minutes on the phone helping a stranger dispute a parking ticket. She fell in love with a man named Grayson, who is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly, because this story is not really about him. He's soft in the places that matter, and harder in the ones that don't. And he loves my sister genuinely. I believe that. But he was raised in a house where his mother's voice was the only weather, and he never learned to dress for a different forecast. His mother's name is Vivienne. She grew up in Darien, Connecticut, married into old money in Westchester, and has never once in her life been told that she was wrong about anything. She is not loud. That's the thing people don't understand about women like her. She doesn't raise her voice. She lowers it instead, just slightly, so you have to lean in to hear her. And by the time you realize what she said, she's already moved on to the next topic. My parents are from Akron, Ohio. My father retired from the post office 2 years ago. My mother teaches second grade and has for 26 years. They drove 11 hours to be at this wedding. They paid for the hotel room themselves, refused to let Fiona cover it, brought a card with a check inside for an amount that represented a very careful month of savings. They dressed carefully. My mother wore a navy blue wrap dress she bought at Nordstrom Rack and had altered by a tailor on 5th Street. My father wore the suit he bought for my college graduation. They looked like people who loved their daughter and showed up for her. That should have been enough. It wasn't. The venue was a place called Whitmore Estate in Bedford, New York. Grand in the way that old Hudson Valley properties are grand. Not flashy, just permanent. Like it had been there so long it stopped needing to prove anything. Long gravel drive, white tents in the garden, a stone main house with ivy climbing the east wall. Fiona had shown me photos for months, and I'd watched her eyes go soft every time. The ceremony was at 4. We arrived at 2:30 for photos. I was the maid of honor, so I'd been there since 11, helping Fiona into her dress, fixing the tiny buttons at her back, handing her the pearl earrings our grandmother left her. By 2:30, I was already running on adrenaline and a granola bar. My parents arrived right on time. My mother had done her hair herself, soft curls. She'd probably been up since 6 practicing. My father shook Grayson's hand and meant it. I watched them walk into the tent for the cocktail hour preview and felt the specific kind of love that is also worry. The love that knows something might go wrong and wants desperately to stand between it and the person it would hurt. The seating chart was displayed near the entrance on a framed board, names arranged by table number. Fiona had spent 3 weeks on it. I knew the final version by heart, our parents at table 1, the head table adjacent, because she wanted them close. She wanted that specifically. She'd told me twice. I checked the board. Table 1, Vivienne, her husband, their son from Grayson's father's first marriage, 2 of Vivienne's sisters, a college friend of Grayson's, and one more name I didn't recognize. I looked for my parents, walked the board twice with my finger. Table 11. I stood there for a moment. Table 11 was near the back, close to the service entrance. I'd seen the layout. It was where they'd put the vendors plus ones, a few distant cousins Grayson had mentioned awkwardly, the kind of table that exists at every wedding as a soft apology. I went to find the coordinator. She was a young woman named Petra, one of Whitmore's staff, and she pulled up the seating document on her tablet and showed me, clearly uncomfortable, that the change had been called in 3 days ago by Vivienne's personal assistant. 3 days ago, Fiona was in the middle of her bachelorette weekend in Savannah. I found Grayson first because I was trying to protect my sister for as long as I could. He was near the bar with two of his groomsmen, jacket already on, looking genuinely happy in the uncomplicated way he sometimes did. I pulled him aside and kept my voice very even and told him what I'd found. He blinked. It's just the seating. The important part is the ceremony. I looked at him for a long moment. Your mother moved my parents to table 11, I said, 3 days ago. Without telling Fiona. She might have had a reason. There were a lot of last-minute RSVPs from her side, Grayson. It's one dinner, he said. Can we get through today? That sentence landed somewhere inside me and stayed there. I went to find Fiona. She was in the bridal suite, touch-ups mostly done, sitting in the chair by the window with a glass of sparkling water and her shoes still off. She looked so beautiful it made my chest hurt. She looked like someone who deserved a perfect day. I told her. I watched her face do the thing it does when she's absorbing something she doesn't want to be true. A stillness, a small compression around her eyes. She set down her glass very carefully. He said it's just seating, I told her. That's a direct quote. She was quiet for a moment. Where are they now? Still in the tent. Mom doesn't know yet. I don't think she checked the board. Fiona stood up and put her shoes on. Not quickly, not dramatically, deliberately. Okay, she said. We found Vivienne near the rose garden, glass of Sancerre in hand, talking to two women who looked exactly like her. Same posture, same gestures, same quality of attention that is really a kind of surveillance. She saw us coming and her expression did not change, which told me she'd been expecting this conversation and had already decided how it would go. Fiona, you look absolutely radiant, she said. That dress, you moved my parents, Fiona said. Not loud, not shaking, just clear. Vivienne tilted her head slightly. There were some last-minute adjustments. With Grayson's uncle's family flying in from Boston, we needed to rethink the head table adjacent. You moved my parents, Fiona said again, to table 11, 3 days ago, while I was out of town. The seating was getting quite crowded at the front, and I thought your sisters are at table 1. Fiona's voice was still very quiet. Your college friends are at table 1. People I've met twice are at table 1. People I've met twice are at table 1. My mother and father drove from Ohio. Vivienne's expression shifted into something that was designed to look like patience but wasn't. Fiona, weddings are complicated. There's a hierarchy to these things. A hierarchy to these things. A hierarchy. Your parents are lovely people, but this is a Hollenbeck family event, and there's a certain presentation. Say the word, I said. I don't know where it came from. Both of them looked at me. If you have something to say about my parents, say the actual word you're thinking. Vivienne looked at me the way you look at something small that has surprised you by making a noise. I'm not saying anything about your parents, she said smoothly. I'm talking about event management. You told your friend at the engagement party that my mother seemed sweet but a little out of place. I had heard this secondhand from Grayson's cousin, who had the decency to feel ashamed about it. You told Grayson last Christmas that my father doesn't quite fit the room. That one Grayson had told Fiona himself, thinking he was being honest, not realizing she would remember every word. My parents have been nothing but kind to you for 8 months. My mother bought you a birthday gift. My father shook your husband's hand every time they met and meant it. And you put them at table 11 because they don't fit the room. Vivienne took a slow sip of her wine. I think emotions are running high today. Emotions are running high today. I'm not emotional, I said. I'm accurate. Fiona was looking at the ground. When she looked up, her eyes were dry. She'd made a decision somewhere in the last 30 seconds, and I could see it had settled into her completely. I need to go speak with my parents, she said to Vivienne, and then I need to speak with Grayson. She spoke with my parents first. I watched from a distance, my mother's face when Fiona took her hands, the way my father's jaw shifted. My mother shook her head twice, that motion she makes when she's being asked to be upset about something she'd rather let go. My father put his hand on Fiona's shoulder. He's always been that way. He absorbs things quietly. Then Fiona found Grayson. I don't know exactly what she said because I stayed outside, but I saw them through the window of the small parlor they'd stepped into. I saw the moment something changed in his face, not guilt, which would have been one thing, but that particular helplessness of someone who has known the truth for years and kept choosing to look away from it. The ceremony happened at 4. It was beautiful. Fiona walked down the aisle on my father's arm and she looked forward the entire time. She said her vows steadily and clearly. Grayson cried. At the reception, during cocktail hour, my mother and father sat at table 1. Not because anyone officially changed the cards back. Fiona changed them herself, physically, with the coordinator's help, 20 minutes before guests were seated. She moved 2 of Vivienne's more distant relatives, kindly, without announcement, just a quiet logistics adjustment. Vivienne saw and said nothing. What could she say? It was Fiona's wedding. But that's not the moment. That's not what I need to tell you about. The moment happened at 8:47 during the open dancing portion of the reception, just after the father-daughter dance. I need to tell you about the father-daughter dance first. My father is not a dancer. He knows this about himself and has never pretended otherwise. But he took Fiona's hand and they swayed together to My Girl, the Temptations version, which has been his and Fiona's song since she was 6 and used to stand on his feet while he shuffled around the kitchen, and he sang along quietly, off-key. Not performing it for the room, but just doing it because that's what he does. And I was standing near the edge of the dance floor and I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. Vivienne was at table 1 by then, where Fiona had placed her. She watched the father-daughter dance with an expression I can only describe as the face of someone trying to understand a language they have decided is beneath them. After the dance, the DJ shifted to something upbeat. People moved onto the floor. I got a drink. I was standing near the back talking to one of Fiona's work friends when I heard it. I heard Vivienne's voice, that lowered version of it, the lean-in voice, saying to the woman next to her. One of her sisters, I think. I just hope the family doesn't embarrass them at things like this. There's a certain weight you carry when you marry someone whose family isn't. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The woman next to her murmured something sympathetic. And my mother was 2 feet away, standing at the table retrieving her phone charger from her purse. I don't know if my mother heard. She has one of those faces that gives nothing away when she chooses, an old teacher's face, a face that has managed 38 second graders at a time for 26 years. She straightened up with her charger in her hand and walked back toward where my father was standing. And she said something to him quietly, and he looked toward Vivienne once and then looked away. But I had heard. I found the DJ. The DJ's name was Marcus, already on the used list, so I'll say it differently. The DJ, a man in his late 30s with a good face and a tablet full of cues, who was between songs and looking cooperative. I asked if I could have the microphone for 30 seconds. He said of course. I don't have a script for what I said. I didn't plan it, so what I'm telling you now is reconstructed from memory and from what 3 different people quoted back to me the next morning, which is as close to accurate as I can get. I stepped up near the DJ booth with the microphone and I said, "Can I have everyone's attention for just a moment?" The room shifted. People turned. Grayson looked up from the bar. Fiona, across the room, found my face and went still. I said, "I want to take a minute to talk about my parents." I looked at my mother and father by the far edge of the dance floor. My father had his hands in his pockets. My mother was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read. I said, "My parents drove 11 hours to be here today. They left on Thursday so they'd have time to settle in. My mother spent 2 weeks helping Fiona address invitation envelopes by hand because Fiona wanted them to look personal. My father built the card box that's on the gift table, the white one with the hinged lid and the little flower my sister drew on it when she was 8, painted on the front. He stayed up until midnight on a Tuesday to finish it." I paused. The room was very quiet. My dad retired 2 years ago from 30 years at the post office. My mom teaches 2nd grade, and she's going back to it on Monday. They raised 2 daughters by themselves in a house that was always warm and always full and always kind. And I just want to say that in front of everyone because I want there to be no ambiguity today about what kind of people they are and what they mean to this family. I looked at Fiona. She had her hand over her mouth. And I want to say to my new brother-in-law, I said, looking at Grayson now, that the two people you're gaining today are some of the finest I have ever known, and you are lucky, and I hope you know that. Grayson didn't look at his mother. He looked at my parents, and he nodded, once, and his eyes were red. That's all, I said. Thank you. I love you, Mom and Dad. I handed the microphone back. The room did the thing rooms do after something unexpected. A brief suspended moment and then applause, warm and full, the kind that isn't performed. Someone at a back table stood up, and then 3 more people did, and then the kind of standing ovation that happens when a room has been quietly feeling the same thing and is finally given permission to say so. My mother cried, proper crying, not dabbing, her shoulders moving, her hands coming up to her face. My father put his arm around her and looked at the floor, and I could see his jaw working. I walked across the room, and my mother held me very tightly and said something I couldn't hear because she was crying, and I was too. At some point, I looked up, and Vivienne was standing at table 1, very still, holding her wine glass with both hands, not leaving, just standing there. Some things don't have dramatic exits. Some things just become part of what happened. Later that night, past midnight, after the venue lights had been brought up and the vendors were clearing the tables, Grayson found me on the stone patio outside. He sat down without asking if he could, which I didn't mind. He'd earned that much. He said, "She's been this way my whole life." I know, I said. I keep thinking I can manage it, navigate it. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. What Fiona said to me before the ceremony, she said she needed me to understand that there would come a point where I'd have to choose, not between her and my mother, between who I want to be and who I've been allowed to be. He paused. She's very precise, your sister. She gets it from my mother, I said, the 2nd grade teacher. He almost laughed, not quite. He said, "What you said tonight about your dad building that box." He did. I know. I watched him do it on FaceTime. He called Fiona to show her the flower and she cried. He was quiet. I should have said something, long before tonight. I should have been the one to say it. I didn't tell him it was okay because it wasn't, entirely. But it was the beginning of something, maybe. I don't know how their life will unfold. I don't know what Vivienne will do with what happened or how Grayson will change or whether he'll change enough. I'm not the one who has to figure that out. Fiona is. What I know is that on the way back to the hotel that night, my parents and I sat in the back of a car together. I'd had too much champagne to drive. My father doesn't like highways at night. And my mother fell asleep against my shoulder somewhere on Route 9. And the car was warm. And my father was looking out the window at the dark Hudson Valley passing, and he turned and looked at me and said quietly, so he wouldn't wake her, "You didn't have to do that." I know, I said. It meant a lot. You mean a lot, I said. It meant a lot, you mean a lot, I said. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. He nodded and looked back out the window. And that was that. I've thought about that night a lot in the months since. Not with anger, mostly. The anger was real, but it was quick, it burned, and then it settled into something more like clarity. What I keep coming back to is this. There are people in the world who will measure your parents by things that have nothing to do with who your parents are. By the car they drive, or the school they went to, or the size of the house they came from, or whether they know which fork is for the salad. And if you love your parents, really love them, the way I do, the way Fiona does, the way I hope everyone who is lucky enough to have parents worth loving does, then you will eventually be in a room where someone is looking at them and finding them lacking, and you will have a choice about what to do with that. I used a microphone. That was my particular circumstance. Yours might be different, but I have never once regretted it, not for a single morning since. My sister called me 2 weeks after the honeymoon and told me she and Grayson had started couples counseling and that they'd had a long, hard conversation with Vivienne about what boundaries would look like going forward. She said it wasn't a perfect conversation. She said Vivienne cried and made it about herself for the first 20 minutes, which is apparently what Vivienne does, and then something shifted, and they talked for 3 hours, and nothing was resolved exactly, but something was at least named. "She's not a monster," Fiona said. "She's just never had anyone push back." "You have," I said. "I have you," she said. "My mother is already planning Christmas. She asked everyone for their food allergies and has a spreadsheet. She does this every year, not because anyone told her to, but because that is who she is. Someone who prepares, who shows up, who makes room. Vivienne will be there. That's going to be a whole separate thing, and I'm already preparing my reserves. But when I think about the card box on the gift table, white painted wood, hinged lid, the little flower my sister drew when she was 8, reproduced in careful brushstrokes at midnight on a Tuesday by a man who spent 30 years delivering other people's mail and never once complained about it, I think that is the measure. That is the thing that matters. Everything else is just seeding. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way, just in the quiet, practical way you start to think about things after you've watched them unfold in real time and seen how almost nothing that happened that night was accidental. Vivienne spent 8 months making small decisions. Moving a place card here, lowering her voice there, introducing my mother to a room full of people as Fiona's family like it was a category rather than a name. None of those things felt like much on their own. That's how it works, usually. The accumulation is invisible until suddenly it isn't, and you're standing in a garden in Bedford, New York, watching someone take a slow sip of Sancerre while your mother stands 2 feet away having just heard herself described as someone who doesn't fit. Those small decisions had a weight to them. They built something, and what they built eventually required a response. I think about Grayson a lot too. He's not a villain in this story. I meant that when I wrote it, and I mean it now. But there's something I keep returning to, which is that he knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. He'd seen the place cards at Christmas. He'd heard his mother's comments and passed some of them along to Fiona, thinking honesty was the same as accountability. It isn't. Knowing something is wrong and staying quiet about it is its own kind of decision, and it has its own kind of consequence. The conversation he had with Fiona before the ceremony, the couple's counseling, the 3-hour talk with Vivienne, none of that happened because Vivienne suddenly developed a conscience. It happened because Fiona finally said, "This is the line, and I need to know which side of it you're on." That's the thing about clarity, it forces everyone to locate themselves. What I did with the microphone, I want to be honest about this, it came from anger. I won't dress it up. I was angry, and I had been angry for months in a quiet way that I'd been managing carefully, and then I heard Vivienne say what she said, and I stopped managing it. But here's what I've learned about acting from anger. It only holds up if the thing underneath it is true. I wasn't exaggerating about my father building that card box. I wasn't performing emotion about my mother's 26 years of second graders. Those things were just real, and I said them in a room full of people, and the room responded the way it did, because truth has a particular sound that people recognize even when they've been pretending not to hear it. Fiona is the one who taught me that, actually. Not with a lesson, she would never. Just by being the kind of person who says the exact true thing in the exact necessary moment and doesn't add anything extra. She did that before the ceremony when she told Grayson he'd have to choose between who he wanted to be and who he'd been allowed to be. She did it in the garden when she said you moved my parents twice, without flinching, without escalating. She just kept saying the true thing until there was nowhere to put it except out in the open. I think that's what I want to carry forward from that night. Not the microphone moment. That was specific to a particular circumstance, and I'm not recommending anyone replicate it exactly. But the practice of saying the true thing clearly, without performance, without apology, and then letting it land wherever it's going to land. My parents built something real. 30 years of showing up, of warmth that wasn't contingent on being seen correctly, of love that didn't require an audience to be genuine. That kind of thing doesn't disappear because someone with better table settings decides it doesn't belong in the room. It just waits for someone to say it out loud. I said it out loud. I'd do it again.